Hey guys, welcome to the School Online YouTube channel, the channel that is all about learning. In this video, I'm going to do something that people have been asking me for a while. So there is a video series that we've been doing where we created a whole ChatGPT application from scratch using Flask, okay? And people have been asking, but how do you sort of like add user authentication? How do you start to add pricing, and how do you start to add charge people for the service? How do you make sure that you remember the conversation and things like that? Because our Flask application was very, very basic. It didn't remember any conversation, it didn't have any database, it didn't have anything built on it. All right, and yes, you could do that on Flask, but it would be very difficult and way complicated. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to take the Flask application that we built, and we're going to but we're going to convert it into a Django application. So we're going to take Python Django, and we're going to build a ChatGPT application on Python Django. Django gives us a little bit more flexibility, that we're going to be able to start working with user models. We're going to start to be able working with databases and tables and so forth, so that we can record and save information. Because number one, you want your chat to remember previous prompts, for example, so that it can remember what you previously asked you, so that if you ask another question that's related to the last one, it can sort of like pick up from there. That's the first thing. The next thing that you want as well is to be able to have like user profile, so that if I log in, it knows I'm the one who's chatting to it, as opposed to the next person that logs in. Maybe you want to charge people for your service and you want to add authentication and things like that. That is going to be it's going to be possible or easier to implement on a Django application as opposed to a Flask, right? So in this video, we're going to actually start a whole video series. This will be the first one in that series, because this is going to take a couple of hours, if not a couple of days, but we are going to go step by step. We're going to start by just building a plain Django application, and then by the end of this video, you will at least have this working Django application. So this working Django application is going to be, let me ask it a question. What is the price of Bitcoin? I know it doesn't know it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Basically, by the end of this tutorial, we would have built a Django app. So this is a Django app, similar to what we had on Flask. It has everything that we had on Flask. You can ask it a question, and it goes to the ChatGPT, and it uses the ChatGPT API to respond. Okay, so this is the ChatGPT response to that question that you asked it. All right, but this is the same level of complexity as we had the previous Flask application. Now, going forward from this week's tutorial, we're gonna build upon what we've done here today. But by the end of this tutorial, you will have this working ChatGPT application, which doesn't have ability to remember conversations. It doesn't have authentication. It doesn't have any of those things, but it's the same as what we had on Flask, but it's now on a Django, right? So this is what we're going to do today, and then our future videos will be building on this. So let's get started. In order to get started, we will be using our Django documentation that we have on our Scholar Online website. So you can access that if you just go to the URL scholar.online-documents-Django. And I personally use this documentation quite a bit. So it's good to, even as a developer on your own, to document and write down the things that you do, so that you have a sort of a systematic way of doing certain things. But what I've started to do lately as well is to combine what I do with ChatGPT. As you can see over here, I've got a ChatGPT window open. I'm always trying to improve my code, because perhaps the way that I've been writing code is not always the most optimal way to write code. So every now and then I will go through my documentation, and I will also sort of like, almost like refer to, or just use Django use ChatGPT as a helper to be like, well, would you write it like this, or how would you do that, and see how it does that. And then I'm hoping in that way I'm going to be improving my coding, and I would recommend that you do the same. What I'm using here, you can see, is the 3.5 default model. Is very good on programming, so you don't even have to have the paid version to be able to do what I'm doing here. Right, so just get into the habit of that. So let's get started. So I've got my virtual server over here. You can see it's empty. There's nothing here we're going to work on. So we're going to start directly from scratch. And if you're a beginner, try to follow along. All right, if you're struggling to follow along as a beginner, you can try and check some of my beginner courses where I teach step by step how to do certain things. Today I'm going to try and go a little bit faster because I don't want to spend time on the basics of Django, but I want to spend time more on how to take Django and build a ChatGPT application using Django. The reason why I'm doing this is I've got a lot of questions around, well, the ChatGPT app that I built, you know, how do you add authentication? How do you make it more complex? How do you add certain things that would make it more of a software as a service or a SaaS platform that you can use? So we're going to take you through those steps, all right? And we're going to start very basic things. We're going to start from the very basic level, and we're going to increase the complexity as we go along. So this is going to be a multi-video tutorial series, okay? It's not going to be just one video. We're going to do multiple videos. We're starting a new series over here because this is going to be a not a simple project, all right? So let's get started. As a start, let's just start with getting the Django application up and running. So that's the first thing that we're going to try and do. So obviously you need to start by updating your packages, right? So on wherever you want to build your application, if you're on Linux like I am, you're just going to do that and start by updating your packages. Hope I got that right. Cool. Then once you've done that, you need to then use your package installer to install these things, Python, everything. So I'm assuming you're starting from scratch, okay? So I've already in this virtual server installed all of this. I don't need to do that. But if you go to the documentation, just copy and paste this line and install these packages, right? And then after you've done that, this installs PostresQL as well in here, all right? So once you've done that, then we're going to log into PostresQL and we're going to set up our database. What happens is with Django is we need to set up a database. Even if you don't think you need any models that are going to be stored in the database, you need a database at a minimum for the user information. So to be able to have authentication and to be able to have people log in and log out, you need to store somewhere the username, the password of that person. So that is at the very least any Django application, whether or not you think you will use tables, you still need a database because you will need to, at least have a user model which needs to be stored in the database. Now, there are two methods of installing a database in Django specifically. You can either use the SQLite database, which comes standard in Django, or you can use the PostgreSQL, which is built for production scale sort of applications. I never use the light Django database. I always go to PostgreSQL, even if I don't intend to take my application into production or take it live. It's just the best practice. It's the best way to do it, and it doesn't take actually a whole lot of effort to do it. So this is just for me the best way of doing it, and you can just follow along and do it that way. So you're gonna this logs you into the Postgres database. This only works if you've already run this, which actually installed the PostgreSQL database. So if you get an error here, perhaps just double check your PostgreSQL installation, right? But if your installation went well and you ran this properly, you're gonna see this Postgres equals to and hash. This means you're now inside of the database. So the commands you're running them inside of the database as the root user of the database. So what do we need to do in the database? We need to create a new database for our application. We need to create a database user, and then there's just some basic sort of like settings that we set in here, and I've got all of that listed in the documentation. So all you need to do for now, if you're not quite sure what exactly is happening, just copy and paste these lines one by one, okay? So not all of them at once, but one at a time. So what does this line do? Create database. This just creates a database that is called Scolo. I don't know if I've created a Scolo database in here, but let me see. Scolo, let me call it Scolo Chat. For me, it's good practice. Whatever the folder name that I give my project, I just use the same name throughout because I don't want to get confused, because I generally sometimes in my virtual server will install multiple Django apps, because sometimes I'm just testing. Like I've got a server like this server, for example, is not a production server. I don't have anything running in production over here. So I could have like up to 10 different Django development applications running in here. So I need to sort of keep a system of which app is which and which database is which. So I always name my database after the application so I know which one is which. So because I've chosen to call this Scolo Chat folder, I'm going to call this application Scolo Chat. So therefore I will call everything, I will name everything after that. So if everything goes well, you'll get a message feedback that says, okay, create database. That has been done, okay? Then you're going to put in a database password. So let's do that. Create a user called Scholar User. So instead of calling this Scholar User, I will call this Scholar Chat User, because I'm now calling my database a chat, and then put user after that so that I know that this is the user. With password, so this is where you're going to select your password. Okay, so for now, I'm not too worried. I'm not going to run this application in production. I'm just going to use password as the password. But obviously, if you're going to be I'm taking you through the steps of building this. I would highly recommend you change this password into a much more complex password. Actually, let me do it for you so I can show you. All right. Complex passwords means you need to have both a combination of letters and numbers and special characters and all sorts of things. All right. So let's say we decided to do this, and we've got a bit of numbers, some special characters at the top as well, some letters, big letters, small letters. This is the kind of password that you want to use when you're creating a Django application. All right, because this kind of password is going to be hard to crack, people are not going to be able to guess it easily. It secures your application even more. If you're building an application for production, you do not use a password that doesn't have complex characters in it. Okay, but obviously the problem with this kind of complex password as well is that you will forget it, and then you find yourself saving it somewhere, right? Because you want to remember what that password was. All right, this is then where the risk actually usually comes about, because you're gonna save it somewhere, maybe in your notes, which is a very bad idea to save your password in your notes. Never ever do that. Personally, what I like to do, I've got a notebook I keep in front of me. Notebooks cannot be hacked. So every time I have a password like this, I will write it down in my notebook, where I have all my passwords written down, and that notebook cannot be hacked. And that notebook, there's no way anybody will find it. You would have to like find my secret hiding stash to find that notebook to be able to hack into all my databases and things like that. All right. So, but today I'm going to be very, very simplistic. I'm going to just use a very simple, let's say password, but let's like make it a little bit hard to, not like a straightforward password. All right, let's like make it, yeah, like a little bit harder to guess. And then I'm going to write it down in my notebook so that I remember exactly what it was. So it was a big capital P, then it was an at, it was a small s, and then how many big s's are there? 1, 2 big S's, 1, 2 big S's, and a percent sign, and 563. This is now a 5, not to be confused with the S63. Let me just double check this again, because there's no way you'll find this if you lose it. All right. So it's P at small s, 3 big S's, percent, and number 563. Okay, so cool. So I've created a user with that password, and then after that we're gonna just alter the user role, which means that the encoding of the database will be UTF-8, which is always a good idea. So I'll just have to update that to Scholar Chat User, because the user we're talking about here is Scholar Chat User. Then after that, the same thing with the this is just sort of like high level settings, so just do it as I'm doing it. Don't worry about it, just to make sure everything runs smoothly. The only thing you need to remember is to update the user, whatever the user that you created, because I created that user with that password. That same user is the one that you are updating all of these features for. All right, and I'm going to use I'm going to do my time zone to Johannesburg, South Africa. You can pick whatever your time zone is over here, obviously. The default being UTC. If you want, you can just update it to that, because it's a standard default time based across many applications. But in my case, I'm not going to be working outside of Johannesburg, so I'm just going to keep that database time zone so I don't have issues with certain time related tasks. So grant all privileges to, this is the database over here. So I'm going to say to the Scholar Chat database and the Scholar Chat user. All right, Scholar Chat database over here, this should match the same database that you created over there, and the same user that you created here should be the same user that you are doing all of these things for, and the same user that you are granting all the access to. Great. So once you're done with that, it's that simple. That's why I always say to people, just use the production PostresQL database, and don't use the basic the internal one. What I love about this as well is that if your app grows larger, which is, maybe I can demonstrate this at some point if you guys remind me, just note it down, is what I'm doing right now. The database is going to sit in the same virtual server as where my application is sitting. So you can see I'm on this virtual server and I'm creating my Django application here, and I'm also creating the database in the same virtual server, right? This is okay for small applications. It's okay for development applications and applications that are not going to be having thousands and thousands of users, all right? So even if you go into production and your app still has even a few thousand users, with Django you'll still be fine, right? But let's say you become really successful and you start to go into the hundreds of thousands of users, for example, right? The virtual server, you could grow, you could increase the size of the server, right? You could, like, maybe you started with a small server on DigitalOcean, you can make it larger and larger and larger, increase the memory. But sometimes you get to a point where the problem is no longer the size of the server. You need to now grow the service, like horizontally, for example. You need to now have like maybe multiple what we call multiple servers running your application, right? What I like about this Django, this system, is that it's going to create the flexibility for you to be able to just upgrade the same application without having to rebuild it from scratch. So when you have a Postgres database that is built like this, later in future, and I've done it multiple times, when my application grows, you can migrate this database to a managed database somewhere else. All right. So because the database sits here, you have the name and the username. You have the username and the password. It's going to be easier later on if you need to now migrate it to like a bigger managed database that's going to be able to have multiple nodes and things like that for growth. So this, for me, it's a foolproof way of building an application, because you can start it small. Okay, when you start an application, you don't know how many users you're going to get. You obviously don't want to start spending money on managed databases, standalone databases, multiple nodes and things like that. Although that infrastructure is the best infrastructure for growth, right? But if you started building your app with Docker and all of those things right at the beginning, you're going to incur a lot of costs when you don't have a lot of users, right? So this is a good sort of like economical way of starting with a small server and still have the database separate, because it still allows you later on, when the time comes and you need to now, for example, decouple your database into a different arrangement, you can just migrate it very, very easy. And maybe just remind me to show you in future later on how to migrate a database when you reach a point where now maybe the virtual server is no longer big enough to allow that. Okay, so that's just an aside. So after we've done that, over here, what this is doing is we are installing a pip and we're installing virtual environment. So if you don't have pip installed, like this is a very new virtual server, you can do that. But in my case, I already do have pip and everything installed, so I don't need that. And I'm already in the place where I want to build my application. So the thing I'm going to do is just to this line over here, because this creates the folder and CDs into the folder. I've already CD'd, I've done everything in the folder that I need to be in. Now I need to just create the virtual environment. So everything runs via virtual environment. I've explained this many times where Python is concerned. You just need to run this on your virtual environment. I'm going to call this Skolo env. So Skolo env is all right. I should have called it Skolo app in Skolo chat env, but it's all right. I've already called it that. So all you need to do is to activate it, and you do that by saying source, whatever the virtual environment you call it, bin activate. And you can see these lines of code are available over here as well. This is the virtual environment, you activate it, and then after that you can install Django, right? So you can go over there and install Django. So it's going to run a bit to install Django. Then you need to install Cycle. This is for the database communication, so you need to install that as well. And then install every other thing that you might need in your application. You don't have to install everything up front, but this is sufficient for you to get started. So we're going to just leave it at that. But if you scroll a little bit lower on this documentation, you'll see I've got some of those very high level things which generally you need to, you need for most Django applications. So for example, requests. If you're going to work with, like in our case, we're going to be calling the API We know we're going to be calling the API. Maybe we'll be calling the image API as well. So requests are going to be important. We're going to definitely need that. Pillow is for image processing, but even if you have users that will have user profile images, you will need that, because the image field inside of Django uses pillow in the background. Okay, so if you think in your application you're going to be using profile images, you can install it. In mine, I'm not going to be using any profile images, so I'm not worried. Crispy forms, if you're going to be using I think crispy forms is a standard one. The moment you have a login form and a register form, you're going to need some of the features that come with Django crispy forms. And then you can have a look at some of these. If you're going to be working with most Django applications, even this one, in the end, you will need it. But we're not there yet. Not channels, but... I don't have it here. No, this is channels. This is something else. I was going to talk about Redis. Okay, so most Django applications will need to have, off a separate Redis server that processes sort of scheduled tasks, like Celery, that would use something like, Celery to do. And this is, for example, especially if you're going to talk about subscriptions, and we'll go into subscriptions, and I think we'll use Stripe to do the subscriptions here. You need to regularly check subscription statuses and things like that, and that doesn't happen in the same application thread, right? It happens in the background as a scheduled task. So those kind of things you're going to need to have Redis, but we're not going to get into that yet now. We will install it when we need it. So for now, this is sufficient for us to get started. I'm going to build this step by step so that you can see the complexity of the app growing as we go, all right? So for now, this is sufficient. So let's clear. And then we can, where were we? We can start our project, okay? So Django start project. I'm not going to call it Scholar app. I'm going to call it Scholar chat. All right. So forgot one thing. I need to create an actual application. So what we've done over here on Django, you can see we've gotten up to here where we have created start project. It just creates the project itself. There isn't an app yet built inside of the project, so we need to build an app. But this is where ChatGPT comes in. I actually asked it, I want to create an app that has a profile model, which I want to extend the user model with, right? So I want to extend the user model, and what's the best way to do it? Here's my prompt. Okay, you are a Django web developer. Show me how to extend the standard Django user model to add more variables related to a user profile. Okay, I got a spelling wrong, but it still understood what I was trying to say. So obviously, it's taking me through the steps. Excuse me for that. First of all, you need to create an app. Then you're going to put it inside of your installed apps. And instead of that app, you're going to build this custom user model. And then you're going to do all of these other things to make the default user model, the custom model and so forth. And then you're going to run migrations. Okay. So we're going to follow the steps. But the important one that I wanted you to see is this one over here, where we're going to create the profiles app. Okay. So let's say create app startup profiles. Okay, so then if we list over here, you can see now we've got profiles, which wasn't there before, and then we've got chat. And if you see into the profiles folder, you will see that it's got all the sort of the files that you need for an application. So actually, let's open these folders now and start working with them and see what we've got there. All right. So before I do that, I'm just going to add this to Git. I'm going to just commit new app. You would not have seen me create Git because I did it off camera, because I don't know if you're going to use Git or not, but if you do, you would know exactly how to initialize and create and start it. But now that I've done that, I'm going to pull the files from here, right? So I've already created a like a sort of like what we call it, like a like in Git, when you've got like an online sort of like, where you can pull things from a different location. And I'm using the documentation inside of Scholar Online, where inside of the cheat sheet, if you go to cheat sheet, you can see how to pull files from a remote repo. All right. So I followed these steps to create my remote repo and be able to pull files into my virtual server. And this shows you how you can push files. So obviously the files that I've got are sitting here in the virtual server, and I need to pull them into my personal machine so I can like type and work with it from there. All right, this is not a necessary step, which is why I'm not covering it in detail. If you need to do it, git pull upstream, I think that's what I called it. All right, let's just have a look there, and then if we clear there and we list, you can see all my files are here. All right, so we've pulled it, and I'm just going to open it using Atom. And now that we've done that, let's put this on the side. Let's go through the files. Okay, first things first, this new app that we just created, this profiles app. All right, let's just finish up the steps given to us by ChatGPT. Inside of installed apps, just make sure that we include it. Okay, so inside of settings, where would this be? Inside of settings, installed apps, just make sure that we have it in here. All right, so let's just add a comment here, and this is our installed, and this is our custom apps. All right, let's paste that in their profiles. And then after we do that, then inside of there, we're going to create a model. So I will get to that later, but this needs to go into the settings file. All right. So into the settings file, let's put it at the bottom. All right. And the time zone. Okay. So we'll go through this file bit by bit. Okay. First things first, I always remove that at the top. Okay. Import OS. We always use OS somewhere in here. And then the secret key, you definitely have to change the secret key. All right, change the secret key to any long string that's going to be hard to guess. It's like a password. All right, so I just, randomize the string, whichever way works for you. All right, allowed hosts. This is okay. So debug, I've set to true because we're still working on this. Allowed hosts. This is going to be you need to fix this first before you can do anything. So number one, the domain which you're going to run this thing on, right? So I think I'm going to run this on, I don't know what domain I'm going to run this on. I'll change it later. But the virtual server, definitely the number of the virtual server over here, which is 4176. Let's just put that in there. 41.76.110136. I think you also have to include just this one, 4 and localhost. All right, and then the URLs, that's fine. So the databases as well, we need to change it. So let's go look at our documentation, because I think we have all of this in the documentation. Go to Django and let's have a look there. All right, so databases, just copy this, all right, the way it is over here in the because when we finished up there, all right, just copy this databases code and replace what you've got over here with it. All right, because this is the PostresQL database. What you had here before, this is the SQLite that I was telling you about. So what it would have done here, it would have created for you an SQLite 3 database under the base directory. So you would have seen a SQLite database being created over there. We don't want that. We want to use our PostresSQL database, which we created. So remember the name of the database. I think we called it ScholarChat. We called it the user. We called ScholarChat user. And then the password, this is the password you wrote down that I told you, write this password down. So I'm going to go and have a look at where I wrote it down and just look for it. I think it was a big capital letter P at small s, 1, 2, 3 s's and a percent and a 563. Right, so I think this was my database, and then the host is localhost and the port. So basically, my username and password, it means you can actually access this database of my, because you already been seeing my allowed hosts over there, but it doesn't matter because I'll probably change this password after this thing or not, but it doesn't matter. This is just a test app, so I'm not worried. I'm making the password, here on YouTube. The static URL here at the bottom, just replace that static URL and then the root is join static, which means we need a folder in here called static. Okay, new folder, we can call it static, but it doesn't matter even if it's empty. If it's empty, it won't actually pick up anything. It's like just, you know, so yeah, cool. So I want to go back into Django settings stuff, because there's more things that you need to be aware of inside of the settings file. Message tags. This is a nice sort of like modifications if you're going to be using messages, and especially for like, you know, displaying error messages, info messages, warning, success messages, and so forth. But I'm not going to use this, so I'm going to leave that. This is your template tags. If you've got like you know, so the important thing here is if you're going to have a templates folder, so let's, instead of dirs, we might want to, you know, do that. So let's copy that and paste this inside of our templates folder. So instead of an empty thing there, let's replace it with that, which means that over here we need to have a folder called templates. All right, and then in this folder called templates, there it is, we can have another folder for all the different applications. So we'll have all the different application folders inside of there. So we can have another folder which we can call profiles. All right, so inside of the profiles application, for example, maybe you're going to have the login index.html or whatever. So let's just like put in one file in there, a new file. Let's just call it login, the login page, login.html. We will fix it later. All right, and then we'll put in the code for the login page in here. But basically what this does is that it tells Django that all our templates will be inside of a directory called templates, and then it will match the app, you know, the app names and so forth. All right, so I've got an app name called profiles, and everything will go in there. All right, so maybe you also have your index.html. You want to put that in there as well. This is like your home page, maybe index.html. Right, for now it's just blank. Let's just put in HTML like that and leave it as blank. Let's say this is the home page. Let's just say h1 you are in the home page, and we'll do the same for the login page. We'll just put in a blank HTML there, and we'll call this login, and then we'll put an h1 that says you are on the login page. Okay, so this is just very basic, just to get started, to you know, to show that, you know, to have like two different index HTML files in there. We're gonna fix this later. For now, don't worry about it. It's just to have something in there. All right, then the next thing is our URLs. So when you get to the URLs, you need obviously to create, currently the basic URL, the only URL that's going to show over here is you know, admin. I mean, the only one that's built in is this one, admins. All right, so perhaps let's say we want to build another URL, right, pattern that directs all our URLs to this profiles application. Right, there is a basic URLs files inside of the main project folder. And I've added a few extra lines in here that are not going to be there in yours, because you could define all your URLs in here, because Django is going to look for the routing information inside of this URLs file. But when you're working with applications or different apps, what you want is, you don't want to define all your URLs in here, or else you're going to have a long list of URLs, you know, for every application that you're going to have. So the best practice is to use what we call include. All right, which is like a way of saying, inside of the URLs file, we're just going to include all the URLs inside of the profiles project, for example, and then we'll define the URLs in there instead. All right, and then if we create another app, because Django is built to be a modular sort of like architecture, so you can have multiple apps inside of one project, and you don't then want to define all the URLs inside of the project folder. What you want to do is, inside of the project folder, you want to include all the different individual application folders, and then you define the URLs in there. So what we'll do for now, we will say, okay, inside of the project folder, the empty path, so you're not going to have anything on the path, but what you could do here, you could say profile, for example, right? You can say profile, and you could then what that will do is that it will append to the main root URL profiles, and then it will add all the other profiles in there. But if you leave it as blank, it means that it will not append anything. So if somebody goes to the main domain, it will just all the URLs that are inside of the profiles, the URL will be under the main domain URLs, and you'll see what it is I'm talking about. So for now, I'll leave this one blank because we only have one application for now. When we get to building the next application in the next one, I will then show you how to then customize the application name in the URL itself, so that you can be able to, especially when your app becomes more and more complex and bigger, and this is going to be a complex app, right? But for now, for simplicity, let's just do it like that. At the top, make sure you import include. You can import it the same place where you import path. So just add a comma there and say include in there, and that include is that include that you're using there. So you're going to include profiles with URL. This means that inside of your profiles folder, and you must make sure that these profiles, the spelling of the profiles here is the same spelling here, because Django is looking for a folder called profiles, and then it's going to look for a file called URLs, which means inside of the profiles folder, you must create a new file called URLS.py. So if you go into profiles there, we've created a new file called URLS.py. And over here, we import path as the same as what we did over there. We need path because path is what we use to define the URLs. And then over there, I just said, okay, import views, because we need to, obviously, the way you route Django applications, that you route certain paths to a view function. All right, so we're going to be using a function-based Django application here, not class-based. I know there's like two different types, and I've always, personally, I'm coming from a Flask background, and I'm just more comfortable with function-based view functions. And you can, it's not better or worse, it just depends on what your preference and what works better with you. Because I like to to put a lot of what we call functions inside of my view like there's a lot of flexibility that function-based view functions allow you, and I prefer that over the class-based. So if you're going to follow my tutorials and you're into the class-based functions, well, I don't use those ones in here. I don't the class-based views, no, I don't use that. I use function-based. So which means that inside of the view file, I'm going to have a function, and inside of that function, I could call it, I don't know, we could call it, let's call it home. All right, we could call it home. So let's say this is the home view, and then we could call that view function view home as well, which means that inside of over here, inside of the view function there, where there's no views, you see there's no views there, we need to have create a new function, a new view, and we'll call it home. And we know that this takes in a request. This takes in a request, and then what we need to do here is, after taking a request, we're gonna obviously write the page based function logic in here. All right, but we don't have any logic yet. We're not doing anything yet. So for now, let's just return the HTML page. All right, so we'll return. We need render. We need to the render is already important for you, so we need to render. And what are we rendering here? So render takes basically three arguments. Okay, so the first one is the request. All right, so the same request that comes in there, so that is by default. So just put in request, and then the next thing that it takes is the HTML file that it needs to render. All right, so where's our HTML file? We need to also give it a direct path to where the HTML file is based. So I want to render this index.html for when somebody goes to the home page. Okay, so if I want to render the index.html page, I could say index.html like that, but it's not going to find it, because now remember what we've done is that we've built it inside of we've built it inside of the profiles folder. So you need to actually specify that you must look inside of the profiles folder first, profiles, and then inside of the profiles files, just make sure I don't have a spelling error. Then you look for the file called index.html. All right, then it will find it if you do it like that. And then the next thing that it takes in here is the context. Okay, the context, or you can call this whatever it is, but this is when you have, this is an object of all the variables that you want to send over to the HTML. So if you calculating variables, or you are defining variables inside of the view function, even if you're calling variables from your database, for example, inside of your view function, the way you send those variables into the context of the HTML is through this object over here. So I always just call this object context, and the object and this object context is just an object of a list of, not really a list really, but it's an object of all the different variables that you want to define inside of your view function, and you want to be made available inside of the HTML. So I'll just call, for now I leave it as an empty object. All right, so leave it as an empty object, and then you send that to the HTML. So currently what we've got over here now, it's no longer a basic Django application. We have edited a little bit our Django application. What we've done is we have, number one, defined an application. Inside of the application, we have defined our URLs, and we have defined at least one view function. And we are routing the home view. So if somebody just goes to the home base of our app, they should be able to go into the profiles.url, and if you go into the profiles.url, which is over here, the home, the blank view, or the home view will display this home view function, which is what we have defined over there. It should go and fetch the index.html page, and it should display that. Okay, so this is just setting up the Django app. We haven't actually done anything. So in fact, you know, if I was like starting from a place where people already understand Django, I could have actually built this outside of the ChatGPT lecture, because this first part of the lecture is just building the Django app, the foundation of the Django app, so we can build on top of that our ChatGPT application. So let's save this. All right, and let's just run it, because if everything goes well, we should see the index.html page, which is this one over there, which just says, hey, you are on the home page. We should just see this. All right, and then we know that we've set up our Django application properly, the databases and everything. So let's save all of that. As usual, I need to add this to Git. I've already created the Git things in the background, because just in case you're not using Git, you don't have to use Git to follow along. Okay, so ignore the Git parts if you're not using it, but if you are, you would need to commit these changes that you're making so you can push them to the virtual server. Okay, so I've managed to push all my changes to my virtual server, so you can see these are all my files now. The updated ones with the templates and everything. So all the changes I've made over here is now ready to be run on the server. But because I'm running this app for the first time, this is just the folder structure I'm running for the first time. We need to first of all run migrations, and this also just double checks that your database installation has been built properly. So it will do the initial migration, so run that. If there's an error, okay, if there's an error, you will see it here. So obviously the first error here is that the user custom model, you can see, okay, so this is my fault. On the settings.py, you'll see I'm referring to this custom user model, but I haven't built it yet. So Django is looking for it and it can't find it. So for now, let's just highlight that out so that this can run. So actually, let's just open it from here. So let's say Python Scolo chat. Is it Scolo chat? Let me just see where my settings.py file is. It's Scolo chat, yes. So just say nano, use nano to open the file. Scolo chat settings.py. We're just going to open it on the command line and just highlight out this line. All right, because we haven't built the model yet. That's why it's giving us an error. Excuse me, coming down with something. So let's try run the migrations again. So this time it says no changes detected, which means actually there's no new models inside of the system, which is fine. That's what we want to see. And then after we've done that, we need to then migrate. After make migrations, you run migrate, and then it will do the initial migration. So this is cool. It means even our database is set up properly. If you had issues with your database, you would see it right now here. Then after that, generally, I like to do this at the beginning to create a super user. This is somebody that has access to the admin panel. You don't have to do this. It's not necessary. So we can actually skip it for now. All right, but we need to collect static. We can skip this as well because we actually don't have a static folder or static files yet. And we can just run server, okay? Run server is actually then running the Django application, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me run on this port. And if you see no errors, then it means everything's running well. But the truth is in the pudding. So let's go look for this 4176110 on the internet. 4176110. It's not this one. What is this actually, let me just copy it from my settings.py file. .136. This is it. All right, so let's just copy it from here, paste it there, and port 8116 is the one I'm working with. You are on the home page, okay? So it's running well. It's showing the HTML page that we built, the index.html. You are on the home page. So our URL forwarding works well. Our HTML templating works fine. So this is just the basic Django application. All right. So I think we have just a little bit of time. What I want to do is to just transform the initial, like the Django application we had before inside of our, remember when we built, if you're following our channel, I've already built a ChatGPT application on Flask, okay? So I want to save myself quite some time. And instead of trying to rebuild the HTML from scratch, I'm just going to use the HTML that I used on Flask, okay? So I'm just going to copy that HTML and use that instead. And you can find it inside of our repo. If you just go to github.com/scholaronline, this is our GitHub repo. If you look for ChatGPT starter, that's the repo that we started with on ChatGPT. And if you go to ChatGPT starter and you look inside of the template, there's a file called index.html. And this index file, it doesn't have anything on it really. It's just like, let's just look through this. Let's see, can we copy this? Copy raw file, okay? We've copied it. Let's paste it in here. So let's remove what we had in there. And let's just paste it in there, all right? And you can go through the content. So this is Scholar Chat. So instead of Scholar Chat GPT, I'm just gonna call it Scholar Chat, all right? Or Scholar GPT. Now everybody is using that GPT name for everything, right? And you can see the way this is different. So let's try and URL for static. Let's try and see if there's any other URL for static in here. It's this one there, and where else? All right. So the URL for static, we need to do this slightly different. I'm going to just remove that and leave it as a blank, because the way we find our static files in Django is different from the way we find our static files in Flask, and we'll get through that later. All right. Otherwise, everything else should be pretty much the same. We are using the Bootstrap CDN. Okay, so we're not going to have our own static folders for now. This is just the first iteration because I just want to get a working application. I'm taking you through this step by step, so we can get the first step working with just a basic Bootstrap front end. Okay, so later on, obviously, you're not going to take such an app into production. And if you stay with us into the more complex parts of the application, perhaps a premium version, I will show you how to use your own custom CSS and HTML to make a more realistic application that you can actually, get users to pay for and things like that. So for now, let's just work with basic Bootstrap, which we are accessing via the CDN. So we don't even have a static folder for now, all right? And then over here, we say that and then get started. And then we've got an ID list group over there, and then we've got some list item and chat and ask ChatGPT. So let's just push this and see what this looks like. All right. Basic HTML. All right. So So this has restarted, I think. So if we go back to our home page and we restart this home page, now what we have is the ChatGPT starting application. Okay, so I just basically, all I did was copy the HTML from our previous project. You can rebuild this HTML from scratch, or you can use any other template that you have for a chatbot. All right, but this is very, very basic stuff. Okay, so so now there's nothing in the engine, there's nothing working. So if I say hello, right, and I press the button, nothing happens. Okay, there's no form. Let me have a look if we have a form over here. Let's see the hello button. Where is the hello button? Ask ChatGPT. Okay, there you go. It's a button. Okay, there's no form. I don't think we used form. I think we used Ajax. All right, so let's see how we're going to use Ajax and jQuery. Okay, so we've already installed jQuery in here, and we can definitely use jQuery in here as well. So maybe let's for the next part of the tutorial, let's just make sure the jQuery is running, and let's build in our OpenAI file over here. So let's call this, let's create a new file inside of the profiles, and we're going to call this file, I don't know, AI engine.py, and we will run all our AI files in there. Okay, so if we go into our Flask starter template, if we go into templates over there, you'll see there's nothing in here. So let's go back to GPT starter. Let's go back to our Scholar Online thingy. Let's look for the AI content starting template, because I think that one had our AI queries in here already. So if we go into app.py, I don't think we did have this in here. Okay, no, this is a different. So let's go back. This is not the one I'm looking for. Let me just go to my repositories in a list. Build ChatGPT with your own data. Let's look at that one. AI API, there you go. All right, so I just want to get this this OpenAI code. All right, so let's just copy this code here. This is just, I don't want to rewrite this. Okay, so I'm just going to paste it in here. So basically this is just the code for doing chat completion. If you followed along, you know exactly how to do this. We basically get our API key in here. So I can basically just replace this thing with our API key, and then we have our messages. We append the system messages, and we sort of call the OpenAI model, and then we return the answer back to the user. Over here, I think it replaces all the new lines with the breaks, and then we do that. Okay, all right, so that's fine. And then what we need to do, if we go into build ChatGPT with your own data, if we go into the templates and we go into the index.html, what you will notice over here is that there is more that we've done to update this index file. Okay, so I'm going to copy this again, and I'm going to paste it inside of the index. I'm going to delete this old index.html file. All right, I'm going to delete the index.html file. I'm going to replace all of these with a hash. We will get the user profile image later. Let's find the other one. The src, let's leave that blank. All right, so basically what this does is, if you remember, so if you don't remember and you didn't do this tutorial with us, I highly recommend you go and look at that, because I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. But in just very short, basic, if I have to give you a little bit of very, very quick background, what we're doing over here is, you can see there is a you are talking, you're asking the chatbot something, and then the chatbot responds. All right, it responds. So this was the blank template, but the template that we are gonna that we're updating to now actually allows you to type something, and when you type it, it displays over there. So when you click that button for saying ask ChatGPT, it will then display what you've asked ChatGPT in the HTML. Right, and then after it displays that, it takes whatever it is you have asked ChatGPT using jQuery, right? It sends it to the server, to the background, and then in the background, let's look for the code for that. So in the background, we're gonna have to go into the app.py file. All right, and you can see over here that there's a form. All right, if request.method is equals to post, we get the prompt from the form. All right, when the form gets submitted, so this jQuery submits it to the home page. Okay, so the URL. Okay, so this is how we do it in Flask, but in Django we're gonna have to do something different. All right, so instead of saying that, we're gonna have to do the way we do Django URLs, which is to say URL for home. Okay, so update that, the URL to URL for home. Okay, so that it knows, but I think that would also have worked, but we can always test it. And then the prompt is the question. All right, and then if there's a successful response, it just appends that list with whatever the response that you get. But go through the previous tutorial where we did this to understand in detail exactly what we're doing here. Okay, so I'm not going to cover that detail because we want to focus on the Django part, not on building the HTML. All right, and over here this just appends the question that you've just asked in there, and then it does all of that in there. But then we still need to build the request.post, which is what you do with inside of the views. So we're gonna put this inside of the views now. All right, so just let's paste that. So if request.method is equals to post, okay, so we need to import a request as well, because we haven't, this is, wait, oh yeah, so this actually works exactly the same way. Sorry, if request.method is equals to post, we need to get the prompt, which is request dot, so in Django we're gonna write this differently. We're gonna say request dot post, and then we get the prompt from the request.post, and then we create an object called response, and then response.answer is equals to AI API, the chat response. Okay, so this is also, we're going to write this slightly different. We're going to say, so we are using the context. Okay, so for the context, actually no, this is fine. We can do the object. So this AI API generate chat response is this function inside here. Okay, it's the same function with a prompt. All right, so let's just see inside of the views again. So let's import from this dot AI engine. So AI engine is the file name, AI engine. Import all the functions in there. So then we can just call the function on its own like that, and that will work inside of Django. And then obviously we don't have a JSONify inside of Django. We need the Django JSON response, and for that I'm just going to ask ChatGPT to remind me. Please remind me how to send a JSON response with Django. There you go. So we need to import JSON response from the top. All right, we need to import it, and then after that we just say JSON response, whatever the data that we want to send. So over here we need to say JSON response like that, and we respond JSON response with the res. Okay, so basically let's see what we're doing here. We've got our HTML over there. We have our high name. So this, when you first of all load the page, there will be that list group over there that will display, and it will show only, hi, my name is Karabo. That will be the only thing that it will display. And then you can basically ask ChatGPT anything that you want to ask ChatGPT. There's a button. All right, so this button over there, when it gets pressed on click function, this button, it takes the value that's inside of the chat input, which is this value that's inside of the chat input. Where is it? This chat input is that input thing that's next to the button. All right, it takes that value in there, and then it appends it to the list first of all. So this list that you have there, it will append that value, and then it will then set that value to 0. And then after that, but it has the question, it has now assigned that variable question to whatever was in the chat input. So that question gets appended to the list first of all, and then after that, that question gets added into the Ajax call. Okay, so that question gets added into a variable called prompt, and then gets sent into the background with an Ajax call with the URL for home. So this is then where in the view function we get that prompt, which is request.post prompt, and then we create an object, and then we call this function there, and then we send our response. Okay, so basically what happens is that when you get an answer here, it will create that whole HTML element, right? And it will whatever that object that was returned, the JSON response.answer, which is what we have assigned the the variable in here to answer. It will just render that. What we could do, which is probably a better method, because you don't need this to be in the same view function, right? This could be its own. You could define a separate URL for these calls. All right, but let's just leave this one like it is for now and check if it works. Obviously we need our API key. All right, so we need our OpenAI API key. So let me just quickly get the OpenAI API key before we continue. You need an API key for all of this to work. How do you get your API key? You basically go to your platform.openai.com. You go to your name there at the top. You go to view API keys, which is where I am right now. Then when you get here, you say create new secret key. It will display the key to you, and then you copy that key. I've already done that. It only displays the key once. So if you copy it and you lose it, you'll never see it again. You'll need to delete the key and create a new one. Obviously that's for security purposes. So I've already created my key there. I don't want to show it on camera, but that's how you do it. You get your key. Then after you've done that, inside of your settings.py file, create a variable called OpenAI _API _key and paste your key in there. All right, paste whatever the key that it is that you got in here. All right, so after you've done that, I've already done that, so I'm not going to do it again. I've already done it. I've done it underneath there so you can't see it. So after you've pasted the key in there, save this file, right? Save all of this, and then in the view function, inside of that AI engine file, all right, at the top there, make sure you import settings. Okay, so you can import settings from django.config import settings, and then initialize OpenAI by saying settings.openai API key. This is the same, should be the same variable that you called inside of your settings.py file. Otherwise, if you wanted, you could just paste the key directly in here if you're not gonna be sharing your files with anybody. Otherwise, the reason why I like to put it inside of the settings file is that then you can access it from anywhere in the application. Variables that you want to define that are application-wide variables that are going to be used in multiple folders, you want to define them inside of the settings so you can call them from any file that you need it. Right, so after you've done that, save all of this, and then back in the virtual server, let's close this. We just need to make sure that we pip install OpenAI, like that. All right, and then it will install the latest version of OpenAI library. And then once we've done that, we obviously need to push our changes as well. Okay, I think we've saved over here. File save all. All right, and then all right, so I will leave you guys with the URL to our Scholar Online repo, because you'll see a lot of the code I've copied from here from previous projects. Okay, so I will leave you with the repo so you can be able to go there and find some of these snippets of code and see, so that you don't rewrite them from scratch. Okay, so now that I've pushed that, let's see, let's clear this. Let's see, let's try and run it. There is an error, AI engine no module name config. So inside of AI engine over here, oh yeah, this import config, you just delete that. So you only need to import OpenAI and then the settings. All right, so that was my mistake. So it immediately ran without an error. Let's have a look. Our application, let's restart this here. There you go. So hi, my name is Karabo, helpful assistant. How can I help you today? Let me just ask it something very, very simple. What is the price of Bitcoin? And see what happens. So obviously the first part where you display that works fine, but let's see if the response also works, if you get the response back from the OpenAI engine. Let's see, do we have an error? Okay, the CSRF cookies not properly set. Yeah, that's a problem. Okay, so the Django does the CSRF slightly differently. So yeah, that was my mistake. So the way we do the Ajax call over here, where is it? In the index.html, we need to include the CSRF function in here. The CSRF token is available in the context automatically. You just have to call it, and you can call it to this variable called CSRF middleware token. So inside of the view function, it will catch it. So this is just a security measure. The token, so it's to protect your application from it receiving data from other players online that are not the front end of the application, because technically the back end is exposed to this URL, and anybody that can access this URL can technically send a form request to it and maybe send malicious information or data or whatever. So how Django protects itself to make sure that whatever gets sent to this URL is from the front end itself and secures that, is that it needs to verify via the CSRF token, which is a token that is constantly changing, but it knows what the token is. So just in a way the data was next to the prompt is equals to question, just add this line. All right, you can freeze this app. I mean, you can like sort of pause this here and see exactly how I've written it, and make sure you don't forget the comma at the end there. So it must be added into the data object that gets sent to the back end. All right, so let's save that and push it. All right, so after you've done that, we might want to restart this. All right, and when you restart that, you'll see everything is okay. So let's try again. What is the price of Bitcoin? and say ask GPT. So this time hopefully it will go, and let's have a look that we don't have errors over here. So we don't seem to have errors. Oh, here is the response. I'm sorry, I cannot provide real-time market information as my abilities are limited. You can easily check the current price of Bitcoin using the search reputable cryptocurrency exchange websites or other. Let's try another ChatGPT like question, you know, like something that you would ask ChatGPT. You know, tell me more about the Anglo-Boer War. All right, so I'm talking to ChatGPT right now, and it works. Okay, so this is a ChatGPT application built on Django. I actually just use the same HTML and the same function which I used on the previous one, where I had built this on Flask, okay, so that we didn't have to rebuild the HTML. But obviously, the reason why you'd want to do this on Django is so that you can have the benefits of Django, the built-in authentication, the built-in sort of like, object-oriented models and things like that. So obviously we're going to take this a step further. So this is just the foundation. This is where we start, and I want you to be able to build your application and get it to this point so that we can build upon it. Okay, so the next steps obviously is we're going to add authentication. So users should be able to authenticate themselves, log in with a username and a password, so we know who's who. All right, so that's going to be the next step. We're going to add an authentication flow, and we're going to ramp up our HTML. Obviously, this HTML is a bit boring, is a bit blah. You're not going to build an application that you're going to sell to people that looks like this. Okay, so in the next couple of videos, maybe not the next one, we're going to build upon it and show you how to now put in your own custom CSS and HTML, where you can purchase templates online, and we can even go through the process, purchase templates online and build an application using a template like that. If you are not a front-end developer and you don't have the skill and expertise to build your own front-end templates, let's purchase some templates online or get some free templates that we can work with to build the front end to look more like a reasonable, user-friendly front end. But actually, I'm not too worried about this. This is not so bad, but I'll show you how to do that, because obviously you want a landing page as well and things like that, right? The next thing we're going to do is, obviously, now that you've got authentication and users have got profiles, maybe you want to have a profile page, you want the users to be able to change their own profile images. Maybe, I don't know if that's important, maybe we don't even do that. We just have a profile setting that's connected to pricing, so that, for example, you can start to charge users for your services, and you can keep track of the tokens that users are using, and be able to charge people using something like Stripe. So maybe we'll do some payment integration. So we're going to take this very basic Django application, which we just sort of imported from a Flask app, and make it into a proper software as a service platform right here on School Online. So definitely stay tuned and watch and make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, and that you don't miss when we create new videos in the future. But for now, this is where we're going to leave it for today's video. We'll continue next week or the week after with us sort of just taking this to the next level.